Good morning, everybody, again. And I would like to introduce you to Ken Tourand from Nicola Valley Institute of Technology, who will be our speaker today. And he will deliver a workshop on board governance, understanding the role of the Economic Development Board. So if you have any questions, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat window. And we will wait until Ken is done his presentation, and then we will read out the questions and we'll get them answered. So Ken, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Svetlana. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ken Tourand, as Svetlana mentioned. I am the president and CEO of NVIT, Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. We are a fairly small group, so maybe what we'll do to just get started, because there's only 7 or 8 of us, we will just introduce everybody. Have yourself introduced where you're speaking from. Today, I am speaking from the traditional territories of the Inuit and Inuit peoples in Merritt, British Columbia. And I've got everybody's name, so I will just call your name. And if you want to quickly introduce yourself, your role, where you're from, and whether you work for a board or sitting on a board or why you're interested. And we'll start on my screen. I'll just start going. So Jason, you're the first one up. Geez, I can actually see you.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Hi, I'm Jason Peters. I'm the last 3 months, I moved from Nova Scotia. I'm Mi'kmaq. I'm now the Economic Development Manager with the Adams Lake Indian Band, and we are looking to reinvigorate the corporation, and I'm a 2-time CEO, so I think that fits right into my bailiwick.
Excellent. Thank you. So welcome. Tasha.
Hello, my name is Tasha Brooks. I'm here on the unceded territory of Cowichan First Nation. I'm the president of the board of Cowichan Quaqua Enterprises. We are a commercial fishing enterprise, and we are currently in the search for an executive director. So we're kind of brand new, fresh as a board. So just here for the information. Thank you.
Awesome. And nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Sue. Okay, looks like there's a thing. Allison.
Good morning. My name is Allison Renholm. I'm a counselor for Homolka First Nation. I'm also our lands governance director, and just interested in learning a little bit about from the session where we've got corporate structure established and looking at developing another couple of initiatives, and just wanting to learn a little bit more about good governance as far as those structures go.
Awesome. Welcome. Bonnie.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I'm just having some technical difficulties with respect to getting my video up, but in the meantime, my name is Bonnie Arden, and I am a technician, a support technician with the Resource Center, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. We actually have some great things happening economically within my community of Sioux First Nation, and so this session really appealed to me as we are about to develop our board.
Awesome. And Jeremy.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Benham. I'm a support technician with the Resource Center as well, and I'm just interested in learning a bit more about economic development boards as well.
Excellent. So welcome. I think that's everybody. Sue, I don't know whether you got your mic working or not. We will assume not. What I'm going to do is I've got a PowerPoint presentation. We are a fairly small group, as I mentioned, and again, welcome everybody. I'm going to walk through, and I'll basically walk through my PowerPoint presentation, share my experience that I have with boards, and I've sat on a number of them, and I've of course I work for one now, and get into a little bit about strategic planning and kind of that role as well. So I will make sure this works. Everybody can see my screen, I'm assuming.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so for today's presentation, again, I will do a quick introduction of myself and NVIT, talk quickly about the Economic Development Board, do a little bit around strategic planning and why you want to engage in strategic planning, talk about the roles and responsibilities of a board member, the 7 skills of board governance, what it means around board effectiveness, and then, like I said, happy to take as many questions that you have, and it can be on anything if I don't cover it, but you have a question around that, happy to take that as well. So first of all, who is my organization? Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. We were founded by the 5 First Nations bands in the Nicola Valley in 1983. We are a public post-secondary institution started in 1995. We have 2 campuses in Merritt and Burnaby. We are an Indigenous mandate, so we don't do any international education. We have 80% of our students are First Nation students. They come from about 60% of BC's 203 First Nations bands. We deliver courses in approximately 35 First Nations communities every year, where we'll actually go into the community and deliver programs right in the community. Including in that is a Aboriginal Community Economic Development Program that's accredited by CAN-DO. That's been going on right from the very beginning. I have a First Nations Board of Governors. I'm very fortunate. My entire board are all status Indians from across the province of BC. And we have an Elders Council that's very near and dear to our hearts and is basically the foundation of everything we do. We have about 1,700 students. Like I said, 80% are Indigenous, 65% of them. We have an immediate entry bursary, and what that does is all grade 12 Indigenous graduates across BC can come to NVIT and get their first year free tuition. Tuition free for adult basic education and children in care, and again, lots of supports. I am currently the president and CEO. I have worked at NVIT for 26 years now, so I started way back in 1995. NVIT's relationship and partnership with CAN-DO has been right since the very beginning. It's about 27 years now, I think. The very first conference in Calgary, way back when. I am a former CAN-DO board member. I am a current board member for Technical Safety BC, which is the BC Safety Authority. And I'm also the owner of Ugamau Strategic Solutions. And what we do is strategic planning, governance, and policy work in Indigenous communities. A number of the groups that I've worked with before, I've worked with the UA group of businesses, the Community Futures Development Corporation of Central Interior First Nations, the New Relationship Trust, Bonaparte First Nations, and Indigenous Homelessness Society, to name a few. So let's talk a little bit about the Economic Development Board. Many First Nations understand the importance of separating the business arm from the nation. And you need to separate that from, let me move this, the business arm of the nation from the political arm of chief and council. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Sometimes the chief and council want that closely, but if you're able to separate that, so the entrepreneurial arm is looking after that and chief and council can do the political stuff, that's the best way to do that. In response to the need to separate, many First Nations communities have set up an economic development board or some type of board to oversee the business enterprises. Sometimes they're a governance board and sometimes they're an operating board, and I'll get into that as we get into the presentation. Often your economic development officer reports to this economic development board. And if you're working for a board, really important to understand strategic planning, the roles and responsibilities of being a board member, what skills define good governance, and how the board can be effective. So let's get started here. So strategic planning, why bother? It really is about understanding where you want to go and how you're going to get there. And so figuring out your mission and vision and values, where are we now? Where do we want to go? And then figuring out how you're going to get there. So mission statements and vision statements are critical to any organization if you do not have one. And NVIT went for approximately 10 years with no strategic plan. And that was before my time. I was a member of the team, obviously, because I've been there for 26 years. But my predecessor, he never ever did a strategic plan. And so, you're kind of like a boat out on the ocean with no destination. You really didn't know where we were doing or what we were going, what we were planning on doing. So mission statement is really, what's your purpose? Why do you exist? For us, it's about educating Indigenous students. But for economic development boards, sometimes it's not that clear. A lot of work I do for one of the U8 group of businesses. The CEOs figures that their purpose is to make money, but the nation is around employing, there's a social aspect around employing citizens. So sometimes those are at odds. And so understanding the mission statement of the organization. And then your vision statement is looking at your organization in the future. Where do we want to go? What does it look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Value statements, of course, what do we stand for? What do we believe in? Honesty, integrity, transparency, accountability, those types of things. SWOT analysis, this is old school 1980s, 90s stuff, but it still works, right? Your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to really give you an understanding of where your organization's at. And then the strategic objectives or strategic priorities. What do you need to do as an organization in order to achieve your vision? And for NVIT, as I mentioned, for NVIT, it's organizational effectiveness, student-centered, community relevance, and forget the fourth one. Short-term goals, what are your 1 to 3 year goals? And then again, how do you achieve them? So that's kind of what it looks like. So what's the benefits of strategic planning? First of all, I think one of the most important things of strategic planning is you get to bring your organization together. And you get an opportunity, especially after COVID. It's a great opportunity. I think everybody's missing that kind of contact, but it stimulates forward thinking, and it starts thinking, okay, where are we now? Where do we want to go? How do we want to get there? Focuses on your true priorities around what you intend, what you're focused on. What do you want to achieve over the next 3 years, 5 years? You want to influence rather than be influenced. You want to be able to drive the bus rather than be reactive to external factors. Stimulates teamwork and expertise, helps improve the performance, and helps solve your organizational problems. As I mentioned, SWOT analysis. This is important and something you should do as part of your strategic planning. And really, it's an opportunity. It doesn't have to take long. Usually you can do this in half a day or less. But take an analysis, get your board together, do an analysis. Okay, what are our advantages? What do we do better than others? And what resources do we have? And that could be human resources, it could be financial resources, but what do we have in our toolbox that is a strength? You also need to identify your weaknesses. What are the disadvantages and what do you need to improve? And sometimes it's, if you need to market and you don't have a marketer on staff, sometimes that's your weaknesses and you need to identify that. What in our organization is missing that we may need to fix? Opportunities, look at the trends going on in the world, across Canada. What are your opportunities? What are the trends? What are the new emerging technologies? For us, like, who would have thought, everything's Zoom, moving to this Wahova app, like they're doing more business. You go on there and you look and they've got 500 conferences happening over the next 6 months. Completely taking advantage of new technologies and the opportunity that COVID has presented. And then your threats. Keeping up with the technology could be a problem. Debt, cash flow problems, obstacles, competitors. Competitors is usually one of your big threats. So if you're in your community and you're planning on opening a small business or supporting that, what's it look like? And so you look at that and you look at community development. You want to make sure that you're not going to be opening something, investing in something that's not going to be successful. So you want to put the process in action, which is sometimes easier said than done. Look at your mission, vision, values. As I mentioned, the SWOT developed along thing. Your staff is involved, but your board and your staff and others. So there's a number of different ways to do your strategic plan. I always like to do it with kind of representatives of your staff, but it's more a board-focused activity. And then once you kind of get your guidelines and your main plan of what that looks like, what your strategic priorities, then you take it to your staff and then you really figure out, okay, this is where the board is going. How are we going to do that? And for us, we came up with an operational plan that puts the strategic plan into focus and around how we're going to implement it. I kind of love this slide. It really talks about leadership and management. Leadership is about doing the right things. And management is about doing things right. And I really like kind of the way that changes. And so again, when you're talking about CEOs, executive directors, it's about leadership. And when you're talking about managers and your financial officers and stuff, it's about doing things right. I talked about SMART goals. This is a really important slide because it really talks about figuring out where you want to go. But let's make it, using the SMART goals analysis, be specific. What are you going to do? Why is it important, and how you're going to do it? Ensure they're measurable. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And how do you know whether you ever achieved it? So you want goals that, that you can say, okay, we're going to increase business by 15%. Okay, that's easily measured. But if you can, we want to improve customer satisfaction. Yeah, you might be able to do that through surveys and things like that, but that's definitely a tougher metric to measure. Make sure they're attainable, not too easy so that, in a month or two, you're going to get them done. But you also don't want to create an unrealistic goal, because then it almost feels like it's impossible to reach. So it should push you. We're going to have to work hard to try to achieve that goal, but don't set you or your staff up for failure, and that's important. Be realistic. It's doable, but not easy. You have the necessary skills and resources available. Set the bar high enough to feel satisfactory achievement, but again, not so high that it becomes unrealistic. And then time bound. What is the time? Are you going to do it within a year, within 3 years, within 5 years? And that way your staff knows what you're doing. And part of the setting of the goals is that your staff, when you're working with your staff, they understand they're part of the initiatives around how to achieve it. And so then they work with you, and the strategic plan is so important because you really want everybody working in the same direction and working together. Implementing the plan. I don't know how many times I've heard about, oh yeah, we've got a strategic plan. Oh yeah, what's to say? Well, it's on the shelf, and nobody ever uses it. That's got to be the most frustrating thing. If you're going to actually do the strategic plan, you need to live that strategic plan all day, every day. It is the hardest thing to do. You need to identify your planning cycle. So include the review dates. Sure, you have a strategy manager. Usually for NVIT, it's myself. And what I do is every board meeting, so we have board meetings, we have about 5 a year. I present both in my report and my key performance indicators directly on the strategic plan. So everything I'm presenting goes back up to the strategic priorities we've set and our mission and vision. And once in a while, I have one of my vice presidents come and wants to, what about this initiative? You need to look and say, okay, does that fit within our strategic plan? If it's not within your strategic plan, you need to be strong enough to be able to say that doesn't fit with where we're going. We're not going to do that now. At the same time, you need to be somewhat flexible. And you may have to go back to the board and say, look, we've got a wonderful opportunity. It's not in our strategic plan, but we don't want to miss it. So there is a little bit of flexibility. The main thing on this slide is how you implement it and ensuring everybody's, again, on the same page. You want to evaluate your plan. So again, you want to track your progress through regular meetings, check-ins, monthly, quarterly. What you don't want to do is do your strategic plan, come up with your measurables, and then do it in 5 years. Well, if you're not on track, you've lost the ability to make some changes. So you want to be, monthly's maybe a little bit too, I would say quarterly. Every 3 months, you should be measuring your achievements versus your plan, and are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving towards achieving our goals and our strategic priorities? You want to have strategy review meetings. Miss one and it becomes a habit. So you got to be a little bit careful of that. We do this kind of annually. I have an annual kind of planning meeting with my leadership team where we actually come together and look at our strategic plan and say, okay, what are we going to work on? It's a 5-year plan. That doesn't mean everything needs to be done in the first year. That's a big learning, right? Some of those things are, okay, we're going to do that in year 4. Okay, well, let's not worry about that. What are we going to do this year? And how's that going to move us forward in the plan? And then again, modify or review if necessary. Communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. You need to communicate your strategic plan and align your team. It's just as important as creating a strategy. So again, generally, you know, your president, your CEO, your executive director is, of course, very, very invested in it because they're reporting up to the board and they've got a leadership team, but you need to communicate all the way down to your staff, all the way down to the lowest levels of your staff to make sure that they understand what it is your organization's doing. Where are we trying to go? And how is my role as a receptionist answering the phone play a role in that? Right. And so again, having that commitment throughout your whole organization really makes a difference when you're trying to implement your strategic plan. How do you keep it alive? Again, promote ownership throughout the organization. If people don't have a stake in it and responsibility in the plan, it'll be business as usual and nobody even knows what's going on. Communicate, again, as I mentioned, communicate the plan to all relevant audiences so they understand. For me, not only is it the board and all my staff, but I let the ministry know. I let my 5 chiefs know. So my 5 chiefs all get a copy of our strategic plan, and I meet with them annually to tell my chiefs, this is what we're doing. This is what we've done over the past year, and this is where we're going next year. So that my chiefs understand what it is that the organization's doing as well. The plan, as I mentioned, needs to be the basis for everything you do, not separate from operations. So it's not something above and beyond that's kind of sits over there. Oh, well, that's just the executive director that looks after the plan, right? You need to push that throughout your organization so everybody understands that they're part of that strategic plan. The strategic objectives, everything you do, again, needs to go up through to your strategic objectives. And for us, as I mentioned, so learner-centered. Like if we're making decisions that are not impacting our students, why are you doing it? So if you're an ec-dev thing, you know, if you're not doing something that's going to increase profit in your organization, why are you doing it? Sometimes there's a reason, but you need to understand that. Again, don't be over-ambitious. Keep your goals and timelines realistic. Focus on priorities so staff are clear on the responsibility to bring the plan to life. Meaningful core statements, mission, vision, and values. And, you know, it's tough. You know, even as president in my organization, it's not my mission and vision. You know, those missions and visions statements that come up are usually a collaboration of 15 to 20 people. So, you know, you almost get to the point with, can I live with it? Okay, I can live with mine. It's not what I would have suggested. So, you know, there's some give and take on it, but it's definitely not fluff. It really talks about who we are. And for us, again, it's about, you know, educating Indigenous students and their commitment to community development. Review it again, review the plan regularly, develop a regular schedule to review the plan. Again, for us, not only am I doing it quarterly, but as a leadership team, I'm having a 2-day planning retreat every year where we're looking at the plan and figuring out what we want to do the following year. Don't leave the planning session without talking about implementation, which I mentioned already. Key is to implement that plan and not put it on a shelf. And again, empower employees. The strategic plan is not the executive directors or the CEO's job to implement. It's everybody's job to implement. And so there needs to be buy-in throughout that organization. And if you're running that, you know, if you're the executive director or the president, CEO, you need to make sure you're pushing that strategic plan down throughout the organization so they understand it. Any questions? I don't know whether I have a chat. Any questions before I move on to board governance?
No questions yet.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Svetlana. So in section 2, I'm going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of a board member. Now we start getting into the nitty-gritty. I have been very, very lucky. I've had a number of boards that I've worked with. My board changes every 6 years. There's a turnover, so that's the maximum amount of time you can be on my board. So I've worked with, as I mentioned, over 26 years, lots of members on the board. And so I've got lots of experience around good boards and some challenging boards, I'll put. So I'm going to talk about the purpose of the board. I'm going to talk about qualifications, which is critical around having a good board. Talk a little bit about legal obligations. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to get into that too much. Talk about the role of a board member and potential liabilities. So why bother even having a board? What's the purpose of the board? So to me, the purpose of the board, there's 4 different areas. One is to be strategic. The board needs to set the strategic vision for your organization. So they need to come up with your mission statement, your vision statement, the values. They set the overall purpose for the organization and where you want to go. They also have a financial responsibility. They balance the resources to align with your objectives and your budget. So my board approves my annual budget every year. Any significant variances, they need to be approved, and they need to also be aware of any spending that's over budget, or if that was to happen. So there is a financial component. They have to approve the audited statements and that type of thing. And so you need to have at least one financial person on your board. There is a political aspect. Advocacy, external relations. For me, anytime I'm talking with my minister, for instance, whether it's provincial or federal, having my board chair or a member of my board with me provides me that opportunity, and they can speak at a different level that I can as the CEO. So that political role is important. And then evaluative. And one of the most important roles of the board is hiring the proper leaders. Right? What is it? They set the expectations for the CEO. They evaluate their board performance and succession planning. And I'm going to talk about it in a bit, but one of the most important roles of the board is, do you have the proper CEO? And if you don't, being able to understand that you may have to pull the trigger and replace your CEO. So talk about qualifications. First of all, availability. The board member, when you're looking for board members, they need to understand what the time commitment is to sit on your board, and are they available to do that? There is nothing worse than scheduling a board meeting and not knowing whether you're going to have quorum, and you're sitting there looking and waiting and hoping people are going to walk through the door so that you can actually hold your meeting. Very, very frustrating. So for me, like we actually have a form that fills out that says this is when our board meetings are and our expectations. I set my board meetings a year in advance, and it's only five meetings a year. My expectation is you set your schedule around my 5 board meetings. So making sure they're available, making sure they're experienced. So again, it's not necessarily because everybody, when you're sitting on a board, at some point in time, everybody's always sitting on their first board. So that's not it, but it's about experience within Indigenous organizations, for instance, or experience with whether it's financial or legal or governance. But you don't want somebody who is, completely brand new and really doesn't have anything to offer to the board. So it's okay if it's their first board. But you want to know what they're bringing to the table and that they've got some experience to share. Full participation. I've had board members that, they show up and basically turn off the camera or, haven't read their agendas or anything like that. So you want board members who are going to participate. You want them to be positive and constructive. You want them to understand what the purpose is of your organization and to be supportive. That's why they're there. They need to be open with a willingness to listen, ethical, and we've got something going on in Kamloops, and there's a big review going on where one of the chief financial officer racked up like $500,000 of expenses over a 3-year period or something like that, and the board is now struggling with how did that happen, right? So really that importance of ethical, and I tell everybody, every decision you make, you need to assume that it's on the front page of the Vancouver Sun tomorrow. So if you're not comfortable with those decisions, then you better not be making that decision. So 100% transparency, 100% accountability, and you need to be ethical. Code of conduct, conflict of interest. For me, I would recommend that they sign off on that every year. Things change over the course of the year. I have a board orientation where I actually meet with the board member and talk about what my expectation is in terms of code of conduct, and also what a conflict of interest is and how to deal with that. Those are important things for boards to understand, and understand what the expectation is of the board before they sign on to the board. The ability to make the tough decisions, and sometimes it's, sometimes they have to close a business. Sometimes they need to, sometimes those aren't necessarily easy decisions, or sometimes they may have to, if you're a NEC dev board, they may have to go against chief and council. And so again, having that, at least a minimum a chair, but having a board that's willing to really make the tough decisions in the best interest of the organization is important. What we use is a thing called a skills matrix. So I look at the skills needed on a board and figure them out into a matrix. For my board, what I don't want is a whole bunch of educators. I've got a whole staff full of educators. So what I'm looking for I want accountants, I want finance people, I want lawyers, I want legal, I want perhaps somebody in the construction trade or trades, somebody with governance experience. So you try to make sure your board is diverse enough so that they're all bringing different skills. And way back when, I think Candu's got way better at it, but way back when, their board were basically made up of all economic development officers. I'm like, well, and Ray and I had a conversation a number of times where I was saying, Ray, you need to diversify that board, because I said, if everybody's coming with the same skill set, your board's not doing it. And now they've done much better. Lots of them are still economic development officers, but again, lots of them are now, they have the financial, they've got the accounting background or legal background and things like that. Legal obligations of a board, duty of loyalty and fair dealing. So again, you need to be loyal, making decisions in the best interest of the board, of the organization that you're serving. A duty of care. So you need to make sure that the organization is operating in a safe manner, that free from harassment and that type of thing. Duty of supervision. So do you have the right people there that are overlooking, and running the organization? And then there's fiduciary duties as well. So board members must act honestly with integrity in the best interest of the organization. They have to have the highest standard of care, no misuse of power, interests of shareholders first, no personal benefit, and understanding confidentiality and things like in camera and that type of thing, making sure that those aren't shared. So those are kind of legal obligations of the board that board members need to, again, understand before they get on the board, and then ensure that they're during their time on the board, they're acting in the best interest of the organization. The role of a board member. So again, what's the board member do? Again, they want to monitor the mission, vision, and goals. So as I mentioned, I report quarterly, basically every board meeting I am doing that. But if you're on a board and your executive director is not reporting back on their strategic plan, I would be asking those questions like, what are we doing? Are we achieving our goals? Are we achieving our objectives? Right? How are the decisions you're making going back to what our vision is? So that's the role of the board, is to ask those types of questions. They need to do a board self-assessment, and what that is basically they do an evaluation on themselves. Is the board acting appropriately? Are they effective? And if the board's not effective, then changes need to happen. So I'm doing that right now. I'm actually doing a board self-evaluation for an organization, and they're asking that, like, is there sufficient enough time to engage in discussion? Are all members of the board engaged in it? Are the agendas coming out early enough? Is there an understanding of the role between the CEO and the board chair? Things like that are important to evaluate on a regular basis. Role of board members around risk management. So I provide a risk register to my board, basically outlining, the top 25 risks that we face. You never eliminate risks. All day, every day, we manage risk. But it really is, our risk register is about identifying the risks and then mitigating them. You can never eliminate them, but you can mitigate them. And often it's putting that in front of the board saying, yeah, we realize that there's risks inherent in the operation, but these are what we've done. And this, it demonstrates that we've at least thought about it and have made some decisions around how we're dealing with that risk. Finance and budget, I mentioned before, it's important to stay on the finances and the budget. And, I don't know whether anybody's following the Laurentian University aspect, but basically they went 3 years and now basically they're bankrupt, and yet we're getting clean audits. And, I look at it and say, how did the board not understand where their financial position was? It's crazy. Culture of integrity starts from the top. Right? So your board chair and your board has to have a culture of integrity. Your executive director or CEO, your head person needs to have a culture of integrity. That goes all the way down. I'll give you an example that's one of my kind of pet peeves, most frustrating thing. I've told my team, don't let me ever catch you doing it. And that is, if you're at a conference and lunch is provided, don't claim lunch on your travel claim. Yeah, I know, it's only $15, but it's about ethics and it's about integrity. And so don't do that. If for some reason you don't have the lunch and you're out for lunch, then fine. But again, that starts right from the top. It's about missing receipts, right? Make sure you have the receipts. All of that type of is so important. And yet if it doesn't come from the top, it's amazing how fast that you can lose that. And all of a sudden, people credit cards all over, no receipts, the auditors coming in. That's the kind of the quickest way you can find an organization that gets into trouble. Sustainable performance is important. Are the organizations or your businesses making money and are sustainable? And if they're not, why are we running them? And again, sometimes there's a social impact portion to it. And I'm working with the First Nations community, an ECDEV board who has one of their businesses is a market that will never make money, but it employs probably half a dozen citizens and is integral to the little community. And so, they've made a decision in partnership or in conjunction with the nation that says we are actually going to keep that business running, even though we know it will never make money. Commitment to improvement from a board, where if you're not moving, you're going backwards. So you always want to look at where the organization's going. Select and oversee management, as I mentioned before, and then where necessary, external communications. And usually that's a conversation between the president or the CEO and the board around who's going to be responsible for the external communications. Potential liabilities, this is of course basically the opposite of what they're doing, but board members who breach their duty of care or breach their fiduciary duty or end up in a conflict of interest and making unethical actions, financial indiscretions, that kind of thing, violation of employment law or environmental law. Those are all liabilities that can get your board member and the board as a whole in trouble. Due diligence is a defense. So as long as you are acting in the best interest and making the best decision you could, you can be relied on in good faith, and that is a defense to that. But if you were willingly making decisions that were against your fiduciary duty, you will find yourself in trouble. Okay, moving on. What is good governance and the 7 essential skills of good governance? So these are very quick. There's 7 of them: stewardship, empowerment, leadership, delegation, direction, accountability, and informed. And again, this goes back to what your board is going to be responsible for. So first one is stewardship. Stewardship is the careful and responsible management of something entrusted into one's care. So this is ensuring that your board members are coming to the board members prepared and committed. Nothing worse than a board member who comes and says, oh, I never got the agenda. Well, you know, it's an 80-page agenda. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Like, how do you think you're going to read your agenda and be prepared? I've actually seen it happen. Very, very frustrating. So you want board members who are prepared and committed. Again, making decisions in the best interest of the organization and doing that advocacy role falls under stewardship. Empowerment. Increase the degree of autonomy and self-determination, acting on their own authority. The board needs to hire the right people and then trust the people to do their job. Have tolerance and understanding. This isn't about the, you know, this, you need to be making, you know, mistakes are made all the time. So it's not about creating an environment where you're not going to tolerate mistakes. But it really is about making sure you hire the right people. And you know, again, it comes back to, is your CEO the right person for the job? That is one of the probably most challenging aspects of a board, is all of a sudden they're looking at their leadership and saying, I'm not convinced that we have the right CEO. And if you don't, the board really does need to make a move on that and get the right person in to do the job. Leadership, creating an inspiring vision for the future, motivates and inspires people to engage with that vision, which I mentioned earlier. Delegation, it's the assignment or responsibility and authority to another person. For a board, it's oversight and not operations. Sometimes one of the worst things you can do is have a board who gets involved right in the operations, wants to understand, you know, all of a sudden they're signing off on travel claims and, you know, they're involved in management decisions when they're actually a board. So the board should be sitting up here at, you know, 30,000 feet where your management is on the ground. And again, so it's really about oversight and not operations. Now, some of the operating boards, or some of the boards are not governance board, they're operating boards. In that, they still have a role. It's a little bit challenging though, because then rather than from 30,000 feet, they're sitting at about 10,000 feet. Again, it's trying to keep them right out of the day-to-day, but an operating board will have a little bit more say in terms of what's going on. Providing direction, again, provide directives on how to accomplish a task or a goal. The board acts as one voice. And so, you know, again, the worst thing you can have is a board member saying, okay, well, I'm a board member, I want you to do that. My response to that is, okay, well, bring it to the board and present it as a motion. So you as an individual board member do not get to tell anybody what to do. Board acts as one voice and the board determines the direction, not one board member. Sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to tell an individual board member, no, we're not going to do that. So you need to be confident enough to be able to say no. Accountability, the acknowledgement and assumption of responsibility for actions, decisions, and policies. But you know, one of the big questions is, who's the board accountable to? Is the board accountable to the shareholders? Is the board accountable to the nation? Is the board accountable to chief and council? So understanding who that board is accountable to is important. Then the last one is informed. Having or showing knowledge on a particular subject or situation. In my case, my board chair, there's no surprises. They get the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the worst thing you can do is blindside your board chair. So I am very, very careful. I meet with my board chair on a regular basis, but they basically know everything what's going on. I don't want them to solve the problem. I just want them to be aware of what's going on. And if they try to solve the problem, then we have another conversation around that's not the role of the board chair. You need to be supportive of what we're doing. You don't need to solve them. There's a joint responsibility around being informed. So as the CEO, I have a responsibility to make sure that the board has the right information. The board has a responsibility to make sure they're reading and understanding. A number of ways. One of the ways to do that is subcommittees. So lots of them have audit risk management committees or financial and audit committees. Some will have an executive committee. Some boards will have HR committees. And that's a really good way to kind of have separate meetings where you can really delve into the issues. At minimum, I would say you should have a finance committee or audit and finance committee, so that prior to the financial statements coming to your board, you have a committee that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of what those financial statements do. So during your board meetings, you shouldn't be spending 3 hours on your financials. It should be about a half an hour at the longest. The other thing on the board meetings is when I first started, our board meetings at NVIT were like an all-day thing. They would start like at 9 o'clock and go till 4. Well, if you schedule 7 hours, the board meeting is going to take 7 hours. Now, my board meeting starts at 5 and ends at 7, and usually includes dinner. So, compact agenda, let's get the work done, and we're finished. So, and it's not that I'm trying to get it. Sometimes it goes till 8, but again, it's around, we don't need 6 or 7 hours to do the work of the board. You need to present it in a way that they can do it in a timely manner, and respecting people's time is important. Last section starts talking about board effectiveness. And so we've talked about the strategic plan and governance. We're going to get into, again, qualifications. So board composition is important. Who is on your board? We have an expression of interest. So we actually make potential board members. You apply to sit on our board. So we're not going to come looking for you. I'll send you the expression of interest. They actually fill out the form. They send it to my organization, and then the current board looks at it, and my board basically chooses their successors, which is really, really unique. But you kind of want that. You want a little bit of say around who's coming in to make sure that the momentum of your organization doesn't start to falter. Again, I mentioned a skills matrix. I can't stress that enough. Ensuring that you have a diversity of skills on your board. Succession planning. I am always looking for new board members. So even though I don't have any vacancies, be looking for new board members. If you come across somebody and you think, man, that person would be a really good board member. I take that name and I write that name on basically a sheet that says potential future board members, and make sure that I have them. In terms of skills matrix, as I mentioned before, everything's important. So gender balance is important to have that. For us, because we're provincial, we want some people spread out. We don't want everybody in Vancouver, for instance. So we need people up north, we need people in rural, we need people in urban. It's important to have that balance, again, that's reflective of what your organization is trying to do. So in terms of recruitment, we're always recruiting and trying to identify potential board members. Board orientation, again, I take a day. Usually it takes 2 to 3 hours with every new board member, and basically walk through. This is the organization. This is the things that we're doing now. This is your role as a board member. Our expectations. Here's our current financial picture. All of those types of things. So when the board member starts their first board, they're walking in at least with an understanding that, this is kind of the board I'm on, and they have some basics. I was on a board once where I got elected to the board. The first board meeting was that afternoon. I walked in, and the first thing they did was they were firing their executive director. And I couldn't even participate. I had no background, but I was like, wow, that was a really, that was one of the first boards I was ever on. It was a real eye opener. Responsibilities, talked about it. So the board bylaws. So every board should have board bylaws. I've done a lot of policy work as well. The work that I did with Community Futures and Kamloops was really around updating not only the board policies, board bylaws, but also HR policies, financial policies for the organization. So making sure you have good policies, and again, reviewing them. Nothing worse than looking at a policy and seeing it was approved in 1998, 30 years ago. So you should have a process where all of your policies, again, every 5 to 10 years at minimum, you're reviewing them and updating them. To do that. Ensure you have media protocols, who speaks when. Basically, I've got it so nobody speaks to the media except me unless they have my explicit authority. I don't want my board chair talking because they may not know the context or the organization. So my board chair knows that should come to me. And if at any time I want my board, or either the board chair or members of the board, I make sure that they've got basically speaking notes around whatever happens to be going on, so that they're well prepared around what they may be talking about. Partnerships is important. Who do we partner with and why? We've had a number of individuals who've wanted to partner over the years. We've actually looked at them and said, no, your values don't align with our values. You know, you've got something in your past that we're not happy with, and it could be around relationships with Indigenous peoples. We will not get into a partnership with those types of organizations. So your board needs to be aware of that. Your executive director needs to be aware of that. And you got to make sure you're not chasing the money, right? You need to make sure that you're making decisions in the best interest of the organization. We've got a number of them where, you know, we've got opportunities where, okay, well, we're going to, you know, will we have the opportunity to get, you know, 100 non-Indigenous students? No, I don't want 100 non-Indigenous students. They can go to, there's all kinds of places for those students to go. I want Indigenous students because that's what we're doing. That's our mandate. And talked about that advocacy piece as well. It's important. So good governance, what is good governance? Governance is setting the mission, vision, and values and strategic directions of the organization, monitoring executive performance, financial performance, and risk oversight. If your board is doing that, where they've got, they set the mission, vision, values, and strategic directions, they've got a good CEO or executive director, they're monitoring that person on a regular basis. Your financial is in good health, and you're aware of the risks and you've mitigated them appropriately. That is good governance. If you've got a board that's working in that, you're exactly where you want to be. Try to avoid these mistakes when putting together a board. Do not have unqualified directors. And again, unqualified is not necessarily about educational background. It's about people who are not bringing anything to the board. So just because they apply, sometimes people are applying for reasons other than in the best interest of the organization. So be aware of that. Make sure you do your due diligence and actually do some research on potential directors. Absent directors, again, as I mentioned before, you want directors who are not only going to show up, but are prepared. You don't want directors who are just going to rubber stamp. So every decision, yep, sounds good, passed. Yep, sounds good, passed, and they're not asking questions. You know, as your executive director, CEO, I'm like, well, this is great, but it's really not doing your organization well. So you want a board who's engaged and understands and is willing to ask the questions. Micromanagement, you know, you don't want, again, if your board's into the operations, into the weeds, extremely frustrating. And ultimately what you'll do is you'll end up losing your executive director or your CEO. Because if it's a good CEO, they're not going to tolerate it and they will be gone. So making sure your board understands governance versus operations. You're 30,000 feet, I'm in the weeds. Board that understands conflicts of interest. And it's not only real conflict of interest, it's also a perception of conflict of interest. So if we're working, if your organization is doing business with a community that your board's on, that board member, even if they're not involved, should be declaring a conflict of interest, stepping out of that discussion. Internal conflicts, again, you don't want board members fighting. It can't be adversarial. But you can have differing opinions, and differing opinions are good because that's really what stimulates the growth. So having a good board discussion on things. And so we've actually moved to a consent agenda. So we've got basically all the approval of the minutes and some of the correspondence and things like that goes to a consent agenda. And that allows a little bit more time on the board agenda for more strategic discussion. So every board meeting, I've got a topic on the agenda, which is engaging the board in something that we're doing, whether it's community education or student supports or, you know, for an ECDev board, it can be say, okay, you know what, we're going to take this meeting, I'm going to do a half-hour presentation on one of my businesses. And you do that, and then you can engage in a real strategic conversation around that one business. So those are the kind of things you really want to kind of start moving to, rather than again just business as usual, right? Get your board engaged in the conversation. Obviously, failure to meet obligations, stifling growth. You don't want. We had that one time. I had a board member who, no, we don't want to grow. We want to be the same organization we were like 20 years ago. That board member didn't last, and the board chair actually forced her into a resignation and said, "That's not what the vision of this board is. We want our organization to grow," and that person was not on the board very long. So how do you know when your board is working well? Competent, effective board with integrity, overseeing competent, effective management. Of course, that's kind of the goal. Functional transparency and accountability. I can't stress this enough. As an organization, 100% transparency, 100% accountability. There are no secrets. Everything can be on the front page of the paper. And if you're operating your organization in that way, only good things can happen, because you're not going to run into the troubles where, oh my goodness, we don't want that. Even to the point where, so I'm approving the budget. I'm having staff meetings. I'm saying, here's the budget. Ask questions if you like. This is what was approved, right? Again, there are no secrets, and if you can run your organization like that, you're in a better position. You want profitable businesses achieving their goals and supporting the mission and vision. And you want boards that are asking questions. So in closing, I don't know where we are on time, pretty close. The makeup of your economic development board can play a significant role on your success as an EDO. And again, I can't stress enough around that skills matrix, making sure you have qualified board. Nothing's more important, right? Have your financial people on there, have your legal people on there, figure out what type of skill set you want on your board, and then go find board members that fit those skill sets. Making sure that your board understands governance and what their role is in the organization. And then again, spending their time on strategic planning and governance training is worthwhile. There was a time in NVIT when, again, I'll go back to my organization, but we were in a significant deficit for about, I would say, 5 to 7 years. And every board meeting, it was about finances and trying to get out of debt. Well, you're not talking about moving the organization forward. All you're doing is saying, okay, well, how do we cut money? We got to figure out the finances. We got to figure out the finances. Since that time, as soon as you make the finances a non-issue, you can really start getting into the strategic stuff around, okay, how do we move the organization? How can we improve our businesses? Profitability is important. I get that. But you want your board engaged in strategy, right? Making the strategic decisions. I think that's all, Svetlana. I will stop sharing my screen and invite anybody to ask me any questions about anything I've said, or if there's anything that I've missed, or anybody want to share anything, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, one thing, this is normally like a 6-day session that we do. So we've done this before where NVIT actually has a course around governance and planning. And so I've gone into organizations where I've actually taken the board through they actually take the course, but throughout the course, they actually complete their strategic plan, figure out their strategic priorities, walk through what good governance is, and I do it with the management team and the board together, and it's been very, very successful. So I've done that a couple times, and it's a great way to do that. So again, it's a fairly quick, high-level oversight, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken. And I do have one comment here. I'll read it out. And because we are such a small group, if anybody has any questions, I think that we can just go ahead and unmute yourself and please go ahead and ask the question. But just a quick comment here from Jason saying, great job, Ken. As someone that is a 2-time CEO and board member, I'm in 100% agreement. The ethics and board member requirements are bang on. And now we'll just open the floor to any questions you may have. Just go right ahead, please.
Hey, Ken, Bonnie here.
Bonnie?
I wouldn't mind speaking a little bit more to the piece around, my nation is small. And so it's, as I'm sure most can relate to, it's about, 10% of the people that do the lion's share of the work. And so we are committed out and we are exhausted and overworked. Those of us who are, hey, sorry, my cat. Anyways, so I'm really interested in having a bit more of a conversation around the explanation around why politics should be removed from economic development, as with Jason's comment in the chat there. It's a difficult process because the people who have the knowledge and traditional knowledge as well as modern day, they want to be in those seats. They want to be on that board. And so, we have I'm on council for my nation, and our chief, Gordon Planis, and we wear a lot of hats, as well as our co-counsel, Rose Dumont. We wear a lot of hats, and it's difficult to keep separate. So
yeah,
I'm on council. I would love to be on our ECDEV board, but I wouldn't go near it with a 10-foot pole because I'm in a political position. And so I'm just interested to hear a little bit more about why keeping those things separate is such an important thing.
Sure. Yeah, and again, it's probably the size of the community, I would say, makes a big difference in terms of the role of the ECDEV board, what you're involved in. So when I look at some of the ones that have been extremely successful, the Tourand Nations Economic Development Board, Gary Merkel at that board was very hands-off. And I think part of it, the reason is chief and council are coming in and usually short term, their 3-year term or 2-year term, they got priorities. Lots of times they're making decisions that are going to get them reelected. So sometimes the decisions the political decisions that are being made, not necessarily align with the long-term sustainable growth of your economic development businesses. So that's really the reason why sometimes you want to separate those. It's not easy. I'll give you that. NVIT for my organization for a while, we had chiefs on the board, and eventually we passed a motion that said no more chiefs. You can be a counselor on your nation. You can sit on my board if you're a counselor, but we don't want chiefs because those chiefs are coming in around making decisions. And it's about, okay, well, I want this program in my community because that's going to set me up or further, rather than making the interest in the best interests of your organization. So to me, that really it is. But I understand the struggle, and especially as a small community where everybody's wearing many hats, I get that. So sometimes easier said than done, I guess is the way I'm going to say that. But it really is around I guess the separation, or again, what are you trying to achieve with your ECDEV board? It's long-term sustainability. It could be employment of citizens. Lots of times those are aligned with what your chief and council wants, but you do want to make sure that chief, like I said, chief and council, they turn over often. New chiefs come in, new ideas coming in. You don't want every 3 years, a new chief or new chief and council to come in, and all of a sudden the direction of your economic development board keeps moving. Because what's going to happen, you're going to be going in a direction, all of a sudden now we're going somewhere else. Yeah. And then you never ever get any traction, and your ECDEV board is always in this kind of a restarting phase and never ever moving forward. So that's really the main reason why you try to separate those. Yeah, good question though. And again, I appreciate the challenges of it, especially in small communities.
Thank you for your answer.
Any other questions? Anyone? And just as a reminder that, PowerPoint presentation slides, as well as the recording of this session, will be posted in the HUA app, in the events app after the event. So if you need to go back and, look at the slides, everything will be available.
So what I'm going to do, Svetlana, is I'm going to throw my email into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
and invite anybody. If you guys have any questions in terms of strategic planning or board governance, if you're engaging in a strategic planning session, you're not sure what you want to do, again, or in a session like this, you're talking very general. When I'm going into communities and doing strategic planning, I want to, I ask lots of questions to figure out, where the community is. How long is chief and council? Is it new members? Is it old members? Do they have an existing strategic plan? Is it working? There's all kinds of things. So again, this is a very high level. But if you're engaging in a strategic planning, or you're working, you have a new board, or you're attracting new board members, you want to reach out, send me an email. I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with anyone around how I can support or answer any questions you have. Again, the role of the board and board governance is so important in the organization, and even Can Do, and they've had some great boards, and I had the opportunity to go in to present to the Can Do board a couple of years ago, and again, it was a great conversation, and understanding conflicts of interest and that type of thing is just so important with what's going on.
That is true. So true. Well, thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate your time and all of the information. And Sue said very informative. Thank you.
Awesome.
So thank you so much. And we have half an hour break now coming up. And then, dear delegates, please go ahead and join next workshop of your liking in the next workshop time slot. And I hope you enjoyed the conference so far.
Awesome. Hopefully we get to see you guys all in person next year.
I know.
In Vancouver. Fingers crossed.
That's right. Okay, Ken, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.